It is interesting that during the Peloponnesian War, the law had to change in relation with the war, in particular in relation with a lot of citizens that died during the Peloponnesian War, in particular also according to sense to Aristophanes, but also to Thucydides with the idea of Pericles in front of his politics. In fact, Pericles decided at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War to develop his law that he decided scientifically that the people outside the city had to enter into the city state. Therefore, the city state it was in relation in that specific type of period with a lot of citizens, with all citizens of Athens. This is really interesting because Pericles, the the idea of Pericles, it was, in this sense, during the Peloponnesian War, Athens against Sparta, therefore against Sparta, it was that Sparta probably could have considered much better the lands outside the great walls of Athens. Therefore, according to Pericles, it could be much more important for the Athenian people lived the uh, territories, lands outside the city state, outside the walls, and with the population that had to enter into the city state to limit, therefore, the attacks against the population of the Spartans, but at the same time developing the commerce and the exchange with the harbor, the Piraeus in this sense, that it was inside the great walls of Athens. However, during the Peloponnesian War, we know that the Peloponnesian War began in particular in 431. In any case, after this period, arrived a pestilence into the city-state because the commerce, because exchange, probably a merchant or some merchants that arrived in the city-state with the Piraeus and they develop this specific type of pestilence, develop this pestilence into the city-state because in particular we know that the population it was all inside the city-state. In this sense, it is interesting that, for example, Thucydides and Aristophanes explained, in particular Aristophanes with his comedies and Thucydides in the War of the Peloponnesian, his treatise, explain how this pestilence developed itself really, really good because the population it was all inside the city state with the decision of Pericles that indirectly because this externality of economics didn't support in this sense the case the idea of Pericles, but on the contrary, develop a specific type of crisis into Athens. In fact, on the other hand, Aristophanes explained that after the death of Pericles, that in any case, the death of Pericles, that was dead because it was contagious by this pandemic. In any case, we know also that a lot of lords of slaves died because this pandemic, because the contagions, and the contagions were really, really important in this period, in particular because, I repeat, all population it was into the city-state. This is really interesting because, therefore, the Athenian people, the Athenian citizens in particular, had to be needed to change the laws, in particular because a lot of lords of slaves died. Therefore, a lot of slaves tried to develop specific type of revolts or try to leave a city-state because they didn't want to be considered slaves and they wanted to had a specific type of possibility to have a specific type of free lives into the city state to have a specific type of possibility to decide for a future. But the costume and the law of the ancient Greek society, in particular, this sense also the ancient Athens, didn't permit them to make this. Therefore, this caused the revolts. At the same time, but Aristophanes explained that this situation it was a crisis because on the one hand the dead, the people who continued to dead, and at the same time the revolts who continued into the city states with also a sort of civil war, indirectly, therefore, the citizens of Athens against the costume, against the idea of the ancient Greek constitution, decided to permit to these slaves to be free if, in any case, they had to decide to vote and to have a specific type of behavior in relation with bravery for the constitution of a city state. This is really interesting because this example is important as an example of externality. The law in relation with an economic impact. An economic impact that, in this sense, for example, Pericles didn't consider, develop a specific type of effects, consequences that the Athenian people had to consider, and therefore also had to consider to change the law to support the city state, because it was much more important limit the crisis into the city state more than a potential fallen against Sparta. Bye.